In this video, we will look at how we can use functions to deal with variables that we've declared to be a type structure. So let's do that. Let's start with the same structure that we used last time, except I've made some modifications. So here we have our student record. We still have the string for the first name. We have a string for the last name. We have our floating value for the grade point average. And I have changed these from a type unsigned integer to a type double because I think that the exam average can be a real number and also the homework can be a real number. So I would prefer to have those as a type double. And I've got the grade here also as a float. Then I did take out the enumerated type letter grade that we had previously. So I'm not going to use that anymore. In this video, what I want to do is to show how we can use our functions and use them to populate the elements of a structured type, as well as to do some calculations involving the member elements of a structure. So let's go with that. Here we have a kind of a skeleton program again that just has some cout statements, and we have some spaces left in here where we want to put additional C++ code, as always. And getting going and starting with this, we still have Alice and Bob. We declared those to be our two students, and they are of type student record. Now, we want to enter some data. So let's enter some data for Alice. And the last time that we did that, we just put some statements right here in the main program. What I want to do this time is I want to use a function so that we can call a function and we could enter the data for Alice. And also, if we want to give Bob some data, then we can call the function and we can let it populate Bob's record as well. Then later we are going to print out the data records for our students, and then we'll do some calculations. So that's what we have so far. So we want to do some functions. And how would we write a function so that we can type in some data for a student? Well, let's go down to the bottom where the functions always live, and let's just put in a function header here. And this function is going to be to enter data for a student. So the line of code looks like this. Now, look at the way that we set up the function. The function is going to return a type student record. So whenever you write a function, it has to be the same type as the data that it returns. So the type of the function is going to be our structure type student record. The name of the function will be enter data, and we will have one argument, one formal parameter that comes into the function, and it's going to be called student, and it will be type student record as well. So we have declared these new types, right? We have user-defined types now. So we can use them in the same way that we've used regular C++ types in the past. So we can use them here as the type for the function. We can use them here as the type for a formal parameter. Inside the function, we are going to prompt to the user to type in some information. So this is going to be the same information that we had in the main program in an earlier video. So let's go ahead and put that in here. And I need to put some curly braces in here, so let's do that. And there's one that goes down here. And we need to take this one out right there. Okay. Now, let's also tab all of this over so that it lines up the way it's supposed to. All right. So here we go. The function then is going to accept as a formal parameter this variable called student. And it doesn't matter what that student is. It could be Bob, it could be Alice, it could be any other student. In here, we are going to use that parameter, this formal parameter student, instead of a specific student's name. Like we used Alice before, and this is more generic. We're going to be able to do any student that we want. So the function will prompt to enter first name, last name, and all of that information, and we will just read that in with cin statements, and we'll use the dot notation for that. Okay, so it's exactly the same as we did before, except now we're making it more generic with the student formal parameter, but we're still using this dot notation. And we're also going to do away with that enumerated type. Okay, that just is too cumbersome to work with, and we wouldn't use it here anyway. Once we're done, we want to return the function, we want to return the value that the function created, which was student. Okay, so coming in, this student is will not have any data stored in the various elements in the the member elements of the structure. So we would call Alice, we'd send in Alice and Bob with no data, and the function would prompt us to type in data from the screen, or from the keyboard, and then we would return it here. So the function returns a fully populated structure for whatever student we send in. Okay, so see, it matches up there, student record, and we're returning student here. So those match up. Now, we have to have the prototype, so we'll make a copy of the first line, and we'll go up to the top of our program where it says function prototypes, and we'll put that in here with the semicolon. So you've seen that before. Now we're ready to go, okay? Enter student data for Alice. We can just call our enter data function, and we'll send it the parameter Alice, and we'll type in the data. Okay, so let's put the call that we need for that here. Now, one thing that you should always watch out for is when you have a function that returns a value, then you must have this assignment statement. If otherwise, this will work okay just by itself, but when you get back from the function, you'll not have any place where you've saved the data for Alice. Okay, so make sure you have that as an assignment statement. The function returns a student record, so you need to have a variable here to collect the data that comes back from the function. So we have declared Alice as a student. We've declared Bob. We'll get to Bob. So we are going to call function enter data, and we're going to send it Alice, the student Alice, with all of those members and of the function up here, all of those member elements. Then the student will populate those. It will return the student record. We'll save it here in Alice, and then we'll be done. Alice will have her data. All right, so let's just put our system pause up there, and we'll just work our way through this program. So I'm going to do a copy and paste. And let's run the program, and let's enter data for Alice. Well, the program compiled and ran, so here's the output. And this looks like a previous one we did. But let's go ahead and type in the data. So this time the function is asking us to do this. So we'll put in the data for Alice, 3.4, exam 89, and whatever we had before, it doesn't really matter, homework 92. So I type that in, and then nothing else happens, okay? But we are going to add code to make things happen. So now we have a function, and the function just accepts a parameter of the type student record in exactly the same way it would accept a parameter of type float, double, and so on. So there's nothing special about passing a structure to a function. That is easily done. The same rules here apply as when we had floats, doubles, integers, and things like that. Now, as we proceed, we need to compute the grade for Alice next, because we didn't fill in the grade field, this member element here. We didn't fill that in. So let's compute that. Let's write a function to do that as well. So let's write a function that will compute the grade. So we will put that down here below the function for entering the data. Okay, so let's take a look at that function. So I'll just put the function here. I'll paste in the code. And it's very similar. It will return a student record, and it's going to accept a student record. So it looks the same as our enter grade function that we had up here. The first line is pretty much identical except for the name of the function. In this instance, we're going to fill in a field called the grade field, and we're going to compute that from other elements of the structure itself. Now, I've made this a little more verbose than it needs to be. We don't really have to print out all that stuff if we don't want to. And in fact, it would kind of be annoying. It would sort of be annoying after a while, so you'd probably want to take that out. But just to show that we're calling the function and we're using the data, I've just left those cout statements in here for the time being. So when we call the function, we will print out that we are in function compute grade. That lets us know that we've progressed into the function. And we're going to use the exam and we're going to use the homework scores in order to calculate our grade. Now, I've noticed that I've got some different numbers here than before, so I would need to correct those. Let's say then our exam, if it's worth 80%, then that would be an 80. And if the homework is worth 20%, that would be a 20 there. So let's fix that. Okay, so we'll take whatever our exam average is, and then that's going to be 80% of the grade. And then we'll take the homework, and that'll be 20% of the grade. So we add those together to get our total grade, and then we save that here, okay, student.grade. Then we will print that out inside the function. Okay, so as I mentioned, we may not want to print out all those statements, so all we really need in the function is that one line. If we just want to compute the student grade, this one line right here will do it. All right, so when we're done with that, then that means that we have populated that last member element of the function, student.grade. Then we will return the entire student record. So I pass in the entire student record, even though everything is filled up except the grade. That's fine. I can still pass in this entire record. That keeps everything together. Then I'm going to just set the grade field of that structure, that member element grade. That will then complete all the data for whatever that student is, Alice, Bob, or whoever. Then we will return the fully populated student record. Now, that's the function. I do need the prototype. So let's get the first line and let's make a prototype out of it and put it up here. Okay, we paste it, we put a semicolon there. Then, if we want to compute the grade for Alice, that's great. We will just call the function to do the compute grade. And it returns a student record, so we call it in the same way we did with the enter data function. We have to have the assignment statement here. Okay, so let's take out some empty space. Let's move the system pause down. And we haven't printed out the data record yet, so let's not go there just yet. So this now is going to call a function and prompt us to type in all the data for Alice. Then we come back to the main program. Then we are going to call another function, and that will compute the grade for Alice, and that will fill up the entire structure. So we'll have everything that we had spelled out here that we want for this structure, this student record structure. Now that it's all filled up, we do want to print it out. And hey, guess what? Let's use a function for that too. Okay, so before we go any further with this, we can't see anything on the screen. If I do the compute grade, nothing really, well, I guess we do see stuff on the screen too because those cout statements. So I will go ahead and compile and run the program, and when we call the compute grade function, we will see some output from there. So let's do that. The program's running now, so let's bring over the output. And I've typed in the information here already, so I'll hit enter. And now we have called function compute grade. Okay, so that was from right here. So in the function we print out, we're in function compute grade. We have the exam, we have the homework score, and then we compute the grade, and then that's it. Okay, so the function is printing out all that information down here. So that's where this output comes from. Okay, so that does it. Now we have a nice working function that will compute the grade for any student that we want. The only thing we have to be sure about is that when we call the function, we need to have values for the exam and for the homework. So we need to make sure we got those scores stored in the structure before we call this function. Otherwise, it'll have nothing to compute with. Okay, now we want to print out the record. We want to print everything out. So let's write a function to do that. So we'll add that into our list of functions. So let's paste it in down here. Now, this function is a type void, which means it does not return anything. It just prints out the elements that are in our function, our member elements, I should say. So we have a function called print record, and like the other two functions, it accepts a formal parameter that is a type student record. Okay, so we can send in any student that has been declared to be a type student record. So inside here, we will print out the same stuff that I showed earlier when we put this same code into our main program. So we'll just print out the student.firstname, separate that with a space, and we'll print out the student.lastname. Then we'll print out the other fields, and we'll give an indicator of what those are: the grade point average, the exam, the homework, and finally the final grade here. Okay, so we print those out using the dot notation with our formal parameter student. Okay, so that should be pretty straightforward. We just print those things out. And we need to finish this by doing our prototype. So I'll copy the first line, and I will put our prototype up here and add a semicolon. So now we have a function that will print out the data. So here's the data record for Alice. We just want to call our print function for that. So I'll just copy it and paste it in here. And this time we don't need an assignment statement because the function doesn't return anything. We just send in the student record and it prints out the data, and that's all it does. It doesn't return anything. Okay, so now I'm going to move the system pause down. I'll cut it from here and I'll paste it down there. And we have everything we need now to take care of the data for Alice. Okay, then we'll come back and we'll do Bob. So now let's go ahead and compile the program and run it. The program still works, so I'll bring it over. I've typed in the data for Alice already. So when I hit enter, then we will get everything else. So we call the function compute grade, as you saw earlier. So we get this information. Now we have the data record for Alice. Okay, so that comes out. That is from right here. We have the cout statement, the data record for Alice. Then we call the print record function. Then the print record function, it just prints out all the data that you can see here. So it prints out all the member elements of the function. So we see the name, first name, last name, grade point average, the exam, the homework, and then finally the grade that we just computed up here with our compute grade function. So this illustrates how we can use functions with structure types, and they work very nicely just like a normal function. I guess there's nothing that you really need to be careful about here. I mean, as long as you make sure that your function returns the correct type and you set the correct type for these formal parameters, then you shouldn't have any issues with it. So now we have this little program, and it takes care of what we need. Let's now finish up by entering some data for Bob and printing it out. So let's just move our system pause out of the way altogether, and we have the functions that we need now. Enter the student data for Bob. Okay, well, I can just call the function enter data. So I'm just going to copy the call for Alice that we had, and we'll change Alice to Bob. Okay, so just change that to Bob and change this parameter to Bob. And we'll be calling enter data, and we'll fill up the data record, the structure for Bob. And then if we want to compute the grade, do the same thing. Okay, so I can copy and paste the call to the compute grade, and we'll just change out Alice, put in Bob. And then when we want to print out the data record, that's the same thing as well. Okay, same functions. So I'll copy and paste here, and we'll print out the data record for Bob. Okay, so now all we have to do is type this information in. But we have the functions to do what we need. And we can do these for any student that we want, right? Anything, any variable that's declared to be a type student record, then we can use those functions. So now let's run the program once again, and we will give Bob some information as well as Alice. All right, so let's bring over the output. I've typed in the data for Alice. I'll hit enter, and we have all the information printed out for Alice. That's fine. Then we're down near the bottom of the program, where we are going to enter data for Bob. Okay, so we're in the function now, and we're being prompted to type in the data for Bob. So I'll make up some data for Bob. So let's put in Bob. So his last name is Harrison, and should be an uppercase there, I guess. And let's put in a grade point average, say 3.5. Let's put in the exam score, say 85, and homework average, let's make that a 90. Then when I hit enter, I'll get the summary information for Bob. And here it is, right? So here we called the function compute grade. So we have this data going in, and that data going in, 85 and 90, so we compute his grade. And then we call the print record function, and we do that right there for Bob, and we get the summary of his information, first name, last name, and the other member elements of the structure printed out here as well. So this illustrates here in this program, this illustrates the use of functions with structured types. Now, while we're in this function, let's talk about, while we're in this program, let's talk about these functions a little bit more before we terminate. How did we call the function? You know, we have different ways that we can call a function. We have call by value, and we have call by reference. So there's two ways to do that. So how are we calling these functions? Well, I don't see any special symbols. Okay, so these are just ordinary formal parameters that we have here. There's not a ampersand that shows up there, which is a key indicator that we would be using a call by reference. So all of these, all those functions are call by value. So we make a copy of the student. In this case, we make a copy of Alice, make a copy of Bob. And when we call the functions, those copies are what are sent to the functions. Okay, so with call by value, the function cannot change any values in the main program because we send in a copy of the data. Well, what if we were to change this up just a little bit and use call by reference? Well, we can do that. We can do that easily. I'll illustrate this here. And I'm just going to make a change to these things. All right, so let's go down to the functions and let's modify them so that they use a call by reference. Now, technically, we could keep the return here, and we could also make that a call by reference, but we don't do that. So if we're going to use a call by reference for enter data, then I would make this a type void. Okay, so that's be a type void function, and this still comes in okay, but I want to return the information through this variable, okay, through this formal parameter. So I'd put the ampersand there. Okay, so that represents a call by reference. We send in the address, and we take away the return here and just put a semicolon. So now we have changed that function so that it is passing data through the argument list. Okay, it's passing the data back to the main program through the argument list. That's a call by reference that we're using. Now we could do that for the other two functions as well, but just doing it with the enter data is sufficient. We will need to, of course, redo the function prototype. So I'm going to redo that. I'll copy this, and I will go to the top here, and I'll just change. And let me just comment this out. We'll leave the old way here. Okay, I'll comment that out, and we'll put in our new version, which is a call by reference version. Put the semicolon there. So now we are going to use the ampersand, and I know Visual Studio doesn't want me to put the ampersand there. It really, really doesn't want me to put the ampersand there, does it? Okay. So anyway, there we go. Maybe it'll stay there. So by putting the ampersand here, that indicates call by reference. Okay, now we need to modify the enter data call because now we are not returning anything. So we don't need the assignment statement. We've made the function a void function so it returns nothing. So I can remove the assignment statement here. Okay, now we're using a call by reference and everything works just fine. Okay, we send in Alice to the function. Alice doesn't have any data going in. Then the function fills up Alice's information and then it returns it through this argument here. So when you do a call by reference, the function can change the variables in the main program. We don't make a copy of them anymore. Same thing for Bob. We don't need the assignment statement, so we can just take that off. And we use a call by reference now in order to populate the data for Bob. So it's very easy. It works the same way as all of the other functions that we've looked at when we use a call by reference. Okay, so we have void. It's a void type. It doesn't return anything. The data comes back through that variable there. All right, now let's compile the program and let's run it again, and we'll prove that we can also use a call by reference as well as a call by value when we're dealing with structured types. Now we have the output, and I've already started typing in the data. So this is the program modified to use call by reference. So I've just typed in all of Alice's data, and then I get the results back, and I get the, here, this is the compute grade function. Then here we have the data record down below here, and we have all that. Now I've started typing in the data for Bob already. So we put in Bob, first name, last name, GPA, and his exam. So then I'll just put in the homework average, and when I hit enter, we'll get all of Bob's data. So this is exactly the same output that you saw previously. It just illustrates the different way that you can call the function using a call by reference instead of call by value. So you can choose whichever one you prefer. In some cases, I mean, if you needed to return data for more than just one student, then you probably want to use the call by reference technique, because with the just a simple call by value, you can only return one thing. Okay, so with a call by value, that's the only way you can return data. Just do a return and then the variable here. But if you have multiple things, then you can line them up here in your list of formal parameters, and you can return as many things as you want. Just turns out in the examples I've shown here, we only return one thing. So you can do call by value. You can also do call by reference. So this example then illustrates how we can combine our new ability to declare this structured type and how we can use that with information and with lots of different information that make up each one of these records, this collection of data. And we can also see how we can pass that around and send it to functions and have the functions do things with the data and then return values. So pretty much everything still follows the same rules that you would expect, but instead of passing in just one little thing here, just maybe the name or the grade point average, we can pass in a whole collection. Since Alice is a structure and since Bob is a structure, we can send in all of that data to the function, and we don't have to have separate arguments for each piece of that data. We send in the whole thing as a unit, and that's one of the real values of being able to use a structured type like that. All right, well, I think that that is sufficient for this video. So let's just stop it at this point.